Well, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensies. This is a podcast where we explore thoughts in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. Now, I know I say that before every podcast, and I explain that this is about, these four categories of things, but many of you have noticed it's been really philosophy heavy. And today we're going to change that. We're going to get into a little bit of nature talk, a little bit of herpetology. Herpetology comes from the Greek word herpeton, meaning like creeping thing. But it's herpetology has come to be a subsection of zoology concerned with reptiles and amphibians. So that includes two of my favorite animals, frogs and turtles. So this episode is really special to me because I've been thinking about interviewing this guy for like 10 years. And so way before I started this podcast, I've had this in mind. So I'm really excited for my guest today, John Richards. Now, he's the owner-operator of Loggerhead Acres Turtle Farm, where they specialize in captive bred and licensed alligator snapping turtles. And this is really important work for hobbyists like me, but also for people who care about endangered species, because as much as 80% of alligator snapping turtles have been harvested and trapped from the wild in order to be eaten in the turtle meat trade. Now, if you don't know anything about alligator snapping turtles, these are the largest turtles in North America, with the largest one being verified at like 247 pounds. So these are beasts. Before we get in, if you're interested in seeing some more pictures, in buying one of these turtles yourselves, go to turtleman.com and find all the facts you need in order to keep them, in order to get the right permit information, all that good stuff for your state. So without further ado, John, thanks for coming on the podcast, man.
Oh, my pleasure, Parker. My pleasure, my friend.
So my love for alligator snapping turtles started when I was a kid. My dad brought home a common snapping turtle, a little hatchling. It looked like a little baby dinosaur, looked like a toy. And we thought for, a couple months that it may be an alligator snapping turtle. And then I spent all this time, I was in first grade, looking in the all the books in the library at school and found out it's a common snapping turtle. But that ignited my love for snapping turtles in general, for turtles in general. And so that's where I started with just this little tiny hatchling. I wanted to ask you, how did you get into loving turtles?
Well, remarkably similar to your story, Parker. I grew up in South Kansas City as a child, and there was a little creek ran through my backyard, which flowed into a pretty predominant river, and the snappers would come up the creek in the, moving in the spring, and I would find them. And as soon as I was probably 4 or 5 years old, I was going down the creek, and I would find sometimes a hatchling, and just like you, I thought it might be an alligator snapper, and it wasn't. It was out of the range for them, and not. But boy, how I wanted it to be. But really, that kind of just started my interest. I started as soon as I could read, just vacuuming up every bit of knowledge I could that was written, all of the contemporary books and even older books at the time. And I was able to, when I was in about 1967, I guess it was, I would have been 9. I ordered one mail order from a place in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Wow.
A hatchling for $5. And
Holy
this
cow.
days before there was even UPS. It came special delivery mail service at the airport and pick it up. But that's how it got started for me. And more and more was just written about the animal, and I found myself finding more information. But the big deal for me probably was when Dr. Pritchard's book came out, The Biology and Conservation of the Alligator Snapper.
Yep.
Out in the 80s. It really was in depth, and for me it kind of became the Rosetta Stone of where I wanted to. I mean, I knew the animals were being butchered. Even in the 80s, they were being butchered heavily in Louisiana and Arkansas for the meat trade, and they were just decimating the species. I mean, going into bios and swamps and sections of river, and just basically taking out whole populations, adult populations. And um, just kind of on a whimsical deal, I ended up down in Arkansas at a place where they were butchering turtles basically from sun up to sundown. And it was really
Wow.
in the summer. It was all alligator snappers. They were coming from all over, uh, the South United States, coming to this processing place. And it was a sad deal, but it was legal. And uh, I was drawn to it because I knew it was key to going, you know, trying to rescue some of these animals, bringing them back to my farm. This was even before I had my farm here. Um, so it was quite a deal. I ended up pulling alligator snapping turtles out of Louisiana and Arkansas for a number of years that were going to be butchered, and eventually ended up with them here at my farm in Missouri. And uh, crazy deal. Much to my surprise, those animals really survived well, bringing them back. In some cases, 500 miles north into a climate, into a completely different geography,
Yeah.
and they've really prospered, like way beyond what I would have thought for a wild caught animals. I mean,
Yeah.
it's captive bred; they can really withstand a lot of variances. But wild caught, that's a different story. You know
Right.
that
Right.
wild
Yeah, they're
caught.
used to their environment that they grew up in. They're used to the water parameters and the stuff they've been eating. Yeah.
That and then throw on top of being caught in a trap with
Oh,
other
sure.
turtles and scratched up, handled by trappers, thrown in barrels and whatever would hold water, and wait till I come down to get them, which sometimes was a couple of weeks. As I was working as for a number of years as a full time chef, not cooking turtles, by the way. Uh,
That's good.
but going down to Louisiana when I had my days off, and I'd go down there 2 or 3 times a month in the summer. But and I'm not saying everyone survived, but really, I'd say 98%, did well, and
Yeah.
so there's just things going into this, building this farm, and there was just things that I couldn't know that,
Hmm.
well, luckily for me, happened to break my way. And sometimes I still look back on it and just go, wow.
Yeah. Well, so with the food industry, there's the story that I always hear is that it was like Campbell's Soup was making turtle soup cans, and they were the ones harvesting out. Was that your experience? Was this for turtle soup? Were people making turtle kebabs? What was the deal
But
here?
Campbell's did have a big contract with one trapper down in South eh, East United States, down in Georgia, Mr. Al Redmond. He would, and he was a really sophisticated trapper in that he had a team. They traveled with refrigerated trucks. They would do
Hmm.
40, 60 miles of river at a time.
Wow.
Uh, and, it doesn't take long before you really ding up a population when you're putting that kind of concerted effort to it. But yeah, Campbell's was big, but then Campbell's caught the PR rap of it all, and dropped that. Many states in the southeast United States, being Georgia, Florida, Alabama, where that early Campbell's Soup contract was really decimating populations. That Campbell's called it quits,
Hmm.
but the damage the damage had been really done. And but Louisiana was another thing, because you've got all that Cajun population down south, and that was a delicacy to them, the turtle meat.
Right.
So it was still went on. They were pulling turtles out of Arkansas because they had trapped so many in Louisiana that they had basically thinned them out so hard it wasn't worth trapping in there anymore.
Hmm.
So they were hitting Mississippi and Arkansas, Western Kentucky, and Tennessee, and just a sad deal. I mean, when you extirpate them at the local level, the logical thing is to just keep branching out, and even when it goes into other states, and that's exactly what was going on here. But they did protect them in Arkansas in '93, and then the final linchpin was protecting them in Louisiana in 2004. But gosh, it just went on so long. And,
Yeah.
I didn't know when it was going to end. The Game and Fish in Louisiana was really tight lipped about how long they were going to let harvest go. I was rooting for them to close it down from the
Hmm.
get go. But, state governments move slow. They've kind of got the attitude down there that nothing could be endangered in our state because we've got so much environment. That's doesn't really hold water
Yeah.
when money's involved and people can make money at something pretty relatively easy like trapping turtles. But that being said, we got through all that. They got the turtle protected in 2004, and it has come back
Hmm.
uh, amazingly in the 16 years. The reports are very favorable. As you've seen, some of the guys that end up with them in their traps down there in Louisiana that aren't necessarily going for alligator snapping turtles, but end up with them in their trap, have
Hmm.
reported very favorable resurgence of the population. So that is amazing to me, and I'm very pleased that that happened or is happening
Yeah.
because this species, as long as they take to mature 16 to 20 years in the wild, all you're doing is there's a waiting game after you've taken the adults out because you've got to wait for the juveniles and the subadults to come up to age to start laying eggs. And but I'm just pleased to report that it really looks like the species has come back is well on its way in Louisiana.
Yeah.
So
Well, and that's a key point I wanted to bring up, that the maturing age. Can you say that range again? Is it's 16 to 18 years or?
to 20 years.
Yeah.
They're a species that they're going to grow more when it's warm and they're feeding. They're going to grow a little faster in the south than they will in the north end of the range. And the north end of the range is really just kind of about where I am. With southern Missouri, um, would be like Kentucky, the western end of Kentucky on the Mississippi side. These are really more of a lowland turtle. They don't come much up into the mountains or up into the highlands. They tend to stick in the well defined rivers and oxbow sloughs and such.
Yeah.
But it appears that turtles from the south end of the range can withstand the same temperatures extremes as turtles from the north end of the range. So
Hmm.
that is something we've learned here, that you could take a turtle from the I-10 corridor down around Baton Rouge and bring it 500 miles north to southern Missouri. And I've had as much as a foot of ice on my ponds in
Yeah.
extreme winters. We never lose a turtle.
Yeah.
They, even though down where that turtle came from, you would never even have a slight skin of ice on the water. So,
Right. Yeah,
um,
just a really hardy turtle when you leave them alone, when you stop commercially harvesting them. The difference between the alligator snapping turtle and the common snapping turtle. So a lot of people in Ohio and in rural Illinois, a lot of people who have grown up eating, turtle soup, and they say, "Yeah, I got me a gator snapper." And it's like, well, you probably didn't if you're in the Midwest.
right.
You're probably eating common snapping turtles. And that's not as big of a deal because it doesn't take as long for them to mature. They can mature and they can lay eggs much quicker than an alligator snapper.
Truth is, you would have to have a hellish industry to ever put a dent in the common snapping turtle population because they can, female can lay eggs and probably 6 or 7 years. Um, they lay more eggs. They
Hmm.
live in a wider variety of environments. They can pick up and move from point A to point B, from pond to other ponds
Yeah.
relatively quickly. They're just a really, really prolific species. Alligator snapping turtle just doesn't have that luxury of being able to pick up and move. They're kind of confined to where they are in Gulf draining rivers and bios and waterways, and they kind of are where they are. Unless somebody puts them in a new river, they won't get there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So here in Illinois, where I'm at, I have to have a permit for these because they're listed as a endangered species. And I guess in Southern Illinois that they find them, or they've at least put
They
them
have
back in there.
down around Cairo, probably some tributaries to the Ohio River. I would there, and I've never traveled south, west, or southeast Illinois, but I assume there's bayous and swamps, and
Yeah.
it gets, you know, pretty lowland down there because it is the Mississippi Basin. That there would
Mhm.
be some decent populations. I don't know. I know they've found numerous alligator snapping turtles in Illinois over the years, um, but I don't know what the overall population density is. I don't think it's great
Yeah, I
compared to,
don't think so either.
uh, but it's because it's on the some of it's going to be because it's on the northern end of the range. You're just
Right.
going to have an thinning as you're getting to the outskirts of the range. Um, and, as you get further south into, Kentucky and then Tennessee and then Mississippi, the populations are going to be more frequent and just more turtles as you get deeper into the heart of the range, which would be uh, really those Gulf states,
Yeah.
Louisiana, East Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, Panhandle of Florida, Southwest Georgia. And they do come up here into Missouri, but not statewide. And of course, they're really small range in Illinois
Mhm.
that hugs that Mississippi River and that southern border with the Ohio River.
Yeah. Yeah. So, folks listening, if you're not in that Mississippi drainage area and you look outside and you find a little snapping turtle, it's a common snapping turtle, and
More than
people, yeah, it's going to be because they live in rivers. Common snapping turtles, as John was saying, they live in puddles. They live everywhere. They're super
likely,
pluri. Yeah.
they can
Yeah.
live in about any environment, and that's what makes them so hardy.
Yep.
Now, say alligator snapping turtle doesn't end up in floods and stuff
Mhm.
like that. They do, and they end up in places where they don't belong. But that's kind of true with anything during a flood. They just kind of sprawl out everywhere. But
Right.
yes, more than likely, if you found a snapping turtle in the Midwest, it's likely a common snapping turtle because just like their name implies, they are common.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're still awesome. It doesn't mean it's a bad deal to find one of these. That I love all types of snapping turtles. So what I wanted to ask you about was we got a little bit of the history of why you love them, and then into you going down and saving them. How many, if you could guess, how many did you save from the turtle meat market?
Oh, over 1,000. We got a lot of them into zoos and educational exhibits worldwide before they went
Wow.
CITES, which is a layered protection to basically it's an acronym for Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species, but it, it basically it means you just can't ship animals willy nilly out of the country unless they're documented. And in this case, you wouldn't be able to ship wild caught animals out of the country without special permission from our government. And so a lot of them ended up in educational exhibits, zoos, and stuff like that out of the country before CITES in 2006. And, I still put a lot of them in educational exhibits for taking to schools and stuff like that. Um, and then my own population of adults is somewhere around 550. I mean, we can track how many nests we dig a year. We dig maybe 330 some odd nests a year. So I know that I've got minimum 330 adult females. The males, I'm just guessing somewhere around you know 150, 175. Who knows? But
Holy cow! And these are big turtles, folks. These are really big turtles.
they've
John,
been 40 pounds.
yeah, are are they all in that pond that you have at your farm?
Yeah, they are, and they've dug
Oh,
all under the banks and created like caverns up under the banks and in the tree roots of the trees that grow around there, and they've just carved it up to basically create the environment that they want. And they all they have about the right body fat of what I want. They're a lean animal that is not really ever really get fat.
Hmm.
uh, so you don't want to make those turtles heavy. They're not meant to be that way. And so I take a look at animals occasionally, and they just kind of do a spot check, and amazingly, it doesn't look like really anybody's getting picked on or underfed. Everything in there that I sample, and basically just by looking them over,
Hmm.
looks great. And like I said, Parker, just one of those things you just could never guess that things would go that way,
Right.
but they did. And kind of amazing. But it still kind of surprises me that we dig right in the neighborhood of 6,000 eggs a year out of that pond. And it's I think any biologist or academic would take a look at the pond, and you tell them you dig 6,000 eggs out of there a year and how many adults are in there, and they would just say no, no.
Yeah. Yeah. So, oh, man, there's so many trails I want to chase down here. But okay, just for folks at home, one of the reasons why it's important to have so many eggs is for the pet trade. So the more turtles and the more available they are as these little hatchlings from John's turtle farm, the more people will be willing to buy them, and the less people will go and poach them themselves. The less they're going to go into the river and try to take them. Because if you can go onto his website and buy a turtle easily after you check the permits for your place, that's much safer for you than breaking the law and stealing them. And so a lot of people who would break the law won't because they're available.
It's that plus just the awareness and education of bringing one of these into a home, just say in a neighborhood of a family, and then kids in the neighborhood get educated and aware and understand the difference between common snappers and alligator snappers, and that's how you uh, uh, spurn people into kids into gaining an interest and then going on and studying them in college, and furthering the scientific um, study of the turtle.
Yeah.
I even to this day, there's people that have bought turtles from me 20 years ago that go on to college, study herpetology, end up doing field studies on alligator snappers and population densities and stuff like that. And that's how you get that going, is to
Hmm.
create awareness and create a spark in somebody that, wow, this is something I really want to work with. And at this point, I've done this 25 years. There's a lot of kids been affected, and
Yeah.
in a positive way. So that's another it's not an unintended consequence, but it's kind of it's good, and I'm real pleased that we.
Yeah, well, I'm one of those kids. I've been my whole life wanted one of these guys, and we looked up your website when I was young, and for whatever reason, my dad just wouldn't pull the trigger on it. And so then, as soon as I was out of the house, I said, "I'm getting a snapping turtle from this dude. I'm finally gonna do it." And so, yeah, man, I'm one of the ones who you helped inspire, and I would never eat, a wild turtle. I wouldn't eat a snapping turtle, and so there's
I,
even
would,
that aspect. What's that?
I wouldn't either.
Yeah, yeah. And so even that, so you've encouraged me to research more. I have snapping turtles because of you. And then also you just changed a piece of the culture, at least, where the desire for that huge trade, that the huge meat market to come back is going to be at least one person less because of this.
Yes, and another thing too that really is interesting about the species, you can't just demand answers on everything and have them. I mean, you can pose questions and get, you know, educated input, but things about this species that we don't understand
Right.
and we may never understand. And you just kind of have to come to grips to that. They're a turtle that's very difficult to study. They live in the same environment with cottonmouths, alligators, mosquitoes, and just, undesirable type swampy, situations that most people find difficult to do field work on.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not easy work, and it has to be done in the warm months. So you're going to be out there with the cottonmouths and the mosquitoes and the alligators. Uh, so the species itself is, takes a little bit of a daunting individual to, not to mention, they snap.
That's right.
There's just a lot of things that would discourage people from wanting to study them in depth in their natural environment. So,
Yeah.
um, but there's more and more people, as we've seen on some of the Facebook groups and stuff like that. There are some really educated academics out there that are really bringing new light to a lot of questions with the species, and I think that's great.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. I saw a video. Maybe it was Greg Whitstock. Someone made a video of them shipping in a bunch of carp to your pond.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it isn't really ship, but I have a deal going with the local bow fishermen. They have these carp derbies where they'll go out and put up pay their little entry fees, and they have sponsors put up prizes and stuff, and they'll go out and shoot these invasive carps. The silvers, the big heads, the grass carp, and common carp. And
You guys have flying carp down there too?
no, they don't come into the Ozarks. They actually come to the dam that makes Lake of the Ozarks,
Okay.
but they haven't gotten up into the. They don't really come up into the elevation much.
Okay.
They stay down really towards the Mississippi, Missouri rivers,
Yeah.
and Illinois River. Uh, but there's no shortage of invasive carp to shoot, and when they're done with them, they don't eat them,
Mhm.
and I really appreciate the fact that I can get fresh, organic food for my animals. I'm not feeding them hormone and antibiotic laden chicken, or I'm feeding them natural food, and it's just really worked out well. And the interesting thing is, these guys that shoot these fish, and I don't want to get lost in this, but a lot of them are very ecologically minded sportsmen that deer hunt and
Right.
fish, turkey hunt, and they like the idea that at least something is being used. Yeah, it's an invasive species. It doesn't belong in our waters. It puts pressure on other indigenous species that we hold dear, but it still is. They feel better if these animals are not just being run through a shredder, uh, buried in a hole in the ground, that they're going to something, to some cause. And so it's really worked out great, and I get all the fish that I really want or need, and it's a beautiful thing. So
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. If you can reuse it and take a bad situation with all these carp and turn it into a good situation of helping, reproduce these alligator snapping turtles, that's awesome.
oh yeah, we're just
Uh,
tripping each other, thanking each other. They're thanking me for taking these fish they don't want to bury in the ground, and I'm thanking them for fresh organic food for my animals, and it's just it's all good.
yeah. So you said you're digging around 6,000 nests season.
Eggs.
Are eggs? Yeah, yeah, eggs. Yeah, yeah. Okay. That's a little bit different, but still an insane amount. Yeah. Are you is this full time for you? And do you have employees at the farm?
My son works, lives here and works with me. It doesn't require tons um, uh, of upkeep with the animals. I mean, they're in a pond that that flushes itself and doesn't
Mhm.
really with fresh water every time we have a rain. And uh, uh, Sky helps. My son's name's Skylar. We call him Sky. He helps dig eggs and just helps around the farm here. And but one thing you said earlier that I think is really important. The best thing you can do with these animals is just leave them alone. You
Mhm.
know, we feed them probably 15 times a summer. Um, uh, and we try to kind of top them off. And then there's about 7 months of the year they don't eat. They won't eat in October, November, December, January, February, March, and about towards the end of April, we'll start, you know, put 1,000 pounds of fish out there, and
Yeah.
they'll make it all go away. And but the idea is to keep them well fed, but not obese. Keep them
Mhm.
that lean, that 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 the way they're found in the wild, which is a lean species. Which you wouldn't think that. You'd think, oh, they get big and fat. The species really doesn't. Um,
Yeah, so they're reptiles first and foremost, and I mean, reptiles when they're adults, they don't have to eat every day. They can go, depending on the species, can go a long time without eating. And then secondly, the alligator snappers don't move a lot. I know
that
they
is,
they come out to hunt and forage, and there's been some new research on that lately. At night, they'll do that, but even when they're young, they got that vermiform lure in their mouth. If you guys need to go look up some pictures, go to John's website and check out all the different pictures he has from the years. They have this thing called a vermiform. And it's a lure, and it fills with blood when fish come, and they lure the fish to them instead of having to go chase them down like a common snapping turtle would.
I might point out that that is most effectively used when they're hatchlings and
Mm,
they feed almost exclusively on the mosquito fish, also known as the gambusia. And most people they are the North American guppy,
mhm.
and they aren't fancy looking like the South or Central American guppies, but they are live bearers. And being a mosquito fish, they eat mosquito larvae. Well, what does that little vermiform lure look like?
Yep.
Looks like mosquito larvae. So now they do lure as juveniles and subadults, and I even have a crazy photo that just blew me away in my pond of a about a 60-pounder luring in a clear little section of the pond. And I don't usually that animal would see you and just shut up and just lay low. But that turtle really let us photo. Only thing I've ever seen like that in 25 years in that pond. But a really good photo, and I think that's on our Facebook page,
Mhm.
and I'm sure it's on our Instagram too. But very interesting that a turtle that large luring, especially in about 6-inch shallow water. But very, very interesting photo of that. You could see the lure. You can actually see the lure kind of jumping and like a worm would wiggle. And
Yeah, I love that. I've saved that picture to my laptop here, and it's really interesting as the lure grows with the turtle, and it's
yeah,
kind of it's weird to think about that, but not really if you're thinking the turtle's growing and he wants to lure in different size fish. So when he's really small, it looks like a little red worm, looks like a little mosquito larva, and then as it grows, it's looking like a different size worm. And that picture that you took, it looks like there's a night crawler in this turtle's
yeah.
mouth. That's gonna lure in a
But the
panfish or something.
truth of the matter is, if that turtle's sitting on the bottom of a river or lake and it's 60 pounds and it's luring like that, the chances are that it's going to get something like a large crayfish
Mhm.
or even like a stink pot turtle or some smaller turtle would go through its jaws, not necessarily to get the worm, could be see the worm, but could more or less be a random blunder of just
Mm.
walking the wrong place at the wrong time. And as you know, those turtles are so patient. They will sit there for hours
Yeah.
underwater, luring the most patient fishermen you've ever seen.
Yep.
And, you know, they just have all the time in the world. And eventually they score. And, you know, I run into folks, especially with the hatchlings, that and this goes back to what you were saying just a little bit ago about them not necessarily needing to eat all the time. And that's very true. People will get a hatchling and they think it needs to eat every day, or if it doesn't eat for a couple of days, They're worried about it. Truth is, they're not baby birds. They're not baby rabbits. They are reptiles. They have low metabolisms, slow respiration rate, very different, and could literally go weeks, if not months, without food and be all right. And
Yeah.
that's goes against the grain of what most hobbyists they get nervous if their animal doesn't eat for 3 or 4 days, and that's just nothing for these things.
Right.
Really isn't,
Yeah.
especially
So
cats that have just absorbed their yolk sac and they're full and they're fat. They may go 2.5, 3 weeks before generally speaking, it's just a few days before they begin luring. And when they start luring with that mouth open, they're ready to eat.
yeah. Yeah. So John, you got so many turtles hatching every year. Are you able to sell all of those turtles, or are you donating to various states DNR to repopulate? What happens to these turtles?
No, I wish that more states would uh, kind of sign on with a captive bred release program to where, say, like I offered your state, Illinois. It's been some years, but I believe it was 200 a year. I wanted to enter a 10-year contract with them that I would supply them, but I don't know, state DNRs and like my
Right.
Department of Conservation. I've offered them the same deal. They get kind of wobbly kneed and we don't know, if we can, they kind of work on their own programs, which is just kind of small scale. I mean,
Yeah.
if we could, just say Missouri. Well, we don't have a huge range, just like Illinois. We don't have a huge range of alligator snapping turtles, but that wouldn't take a mathematician to figure out that if you raised 200 a year to 4 inches and released them in suitable protected environment, that you would probably have north of an 80% uh, survivorship to adulthood, and you could really plant the seeds for the future. I mean, you could go into areas that that these turtles have formerly been abundant or is good, and select that environment. Protect them as far as no trot line fishing, no limb lines, no hoop nets. Excuse me, and you really could effectively plant the seeds for 20 years down the road. But state agencies sometimes are slow to move. They're slow to accept help, and
Hmm.
they kind of like, you know, to move at a snail's pace. It seems like, and so I'm patiently waiting, but I'm not holding my breath that Illinois or Missouri will ever uh, accept any mouse. I do know, and I've read of individuals in Louisiana, especially, that raise small amounts of them and let them go. Either let the hatchlings go right away or raise them up and let them go. And I kind of refer to those as black ops projects because they're of the approval of the government, state
Hmm.
government. But the state government realizes that in some states that they just need to let this go and there is no harm being done. It is legal for them to still have alligator snapping turtles in Louisiana to collect by fishing or whatever to eat them. There is just no sale of the alligator snapping turtle.
Oh, okay.
So they get rid of the commerce end of it pretty effectively by banning the sale. And then, of course, if you leave the state with it and sell it or something, then it's federal laws have been violated. And but at any rate, as far as the reintroduction program goes, there's really nothing huge going on, and my hope is that the animal can uh, come back on its own, and
Hmm.
it really looks like that's the indications we're seeing.
Yeah.
So
Oh, that's really helpful. One of my dreams would be in 20 years or whatever, that my turtles would be ready to go and I could donate some eggs to Illinois DNR. If I'm still living here, who knows? Maybe I'll move south and try to make my own pond kind of thing. But I would love to do that, help out with blandings and spotted turtles and alligator snappers, because blandings and spotteds get their habitat destroyed, and so I don't think it's been the meat market like alligator snappers, but they're putting up parking lots in every marsh ever, and
Yeah,
all around Chicagolands. But it's really a big marsh, but they pave over everything.
they do, and I don't want to take a bunch of time, but I noticed on one of my train trips into downtown Chicago from the suburbs that there was just tons of blandings. I mean, just lowland, uh, even in the urbans, some of it, and we just don't have. That's why we don't have blandings turtles. That we don't have those marshy sloughs and
Yeah,
stuff like that, and those turtles are environmentally specific, the blandings and the spotteds, and you take away the environment, you take away the turtle, and of
yeah,
course building roads, they just get hammered on the highways
yeah.
and roads, and that's just another part of environmental destruction, if you ask me, building roads and highways.
Yeah, definitely. And so you've inspired me looking at your. I had no idea the scale that you were doing until we talked right now, with the amount that you have. But you've definitely inspired me, and I know you've inspired others to get to work on alligator snappers, but also on other species like the blandings and the spotted. And so that's something that I could do here. I could make my own pond and start that going. The problem with Illinois is you're not allowed to breed your endangered species yet, and I think they're working on some legislation. So hopefully, the next 5-10 years we can get that going. But yeah, we'll see.
Big on telling you you can't do something, but they won't tell you why.
Yeah,
And this that may very well be one of those things. And they've come to the realization, well, we don't really have any good reason why someone couldn't breed an endangered species, as long as it wasn't taken from the wild.
hmm.
I mean, it is your property. There is property laws.
Right.
I think.
Yeah, yeah. It's so true. So keeping going here, just a random question. I don't know if you'll have an answer for this. How old do you think your oldest turtle is?
Well, I will generalize it this way. I have some females that, oh my gosh, just look like Methuselahs. They're just the shells, the keel's almost worn off, all grayed out, look like they're over 100 years old. And they looked like that 20 and 25 years ago. And they're
Wow.
still in, cranking out eggs every year. I, I, I really believe that this turtle goes 150 to 200 years,
Wow.
uh, relatively common for them to do that. But if you think about it, the thing is when did these animals first become captive bred? Who has actually done a study, a natural study to where a hatchling grew at a natural rate and someone would track it for 100 years? Well, we'd just be it'd be 1920, and I don't know of anybody doing anything 100 years ago with hatchling the alligator snap. So you have captive bred animals, which the diet may not be the same, the
Hmm.
growth certainly isn't going to be the same. That tells me the aging process isn't going to be the same. These animals probably aren't going to live as long because they're not eating the natural diet. And I'm telling you, these leaner animals are going to live longer.
Hmm.
They're going to live longer. Um, Heavy animals aren't any healthier than heavy people. Um, some of these, it's a rule of thumb, uh, to some, that if you had a 150-pound turtle that was caught out of the wild, that animal is likely about a pound a year at about 150 pounds.
Wow.
That obviously is not exact, but I think that is a pretty good rule on a wild caught animal,
Hmm.
uh, that has not been uh, uh, overfed or even really plumped up, just making its living day by day.
Yeah.
And I strongly believe these animals go 150 to 200. and 100 is at 100 years old, that just is a relatively common thing.
Yeah, which is just so insane to go back in your history book and see what was going on when this turtle was a hatchling.
Well, about this too, when you go in and trap, when they were trapping them, and you go into an area and just take out all the adults, you're removing a huge amount of the eggs that would be deposited in the ground, and
Hmm.
those nests are predated on by raccoons, armadillos, skunks, what possums, uh, and you need a large population to uh, to where 1 or 2% of the hatchlings make it to adulthood, and the less eggs you have in the ground, it hurts that propelling that breeding population forward when you're missing almost all of the adults
Yeah.
have been trapped out. So it's a daunting thing, but nature finds its way, and I think this species is a lot more diverse
Hmm.
than environmentally. They've discovered populations in areas that they did not think that would be an adequate environment, and they're finding that, yeah, these animals have been living in here a long, long time and doing quite well. So there's still a lot being learned. Still a
Yeah.
lot being learned.
So how many eggs in a clutch per average, you think?
I would say 28 to 32, something in there. Um, I'd say if you looked at all on my ledger sheets of all the nests that we have dug, and we track them day by day, each day that they lay every year, I'd say the average number is probably 28.
Wow. Yeah, that is not what you'd expect. Knowing common snappers can lay up to like 40 or so.
Common snappers can lay 70 or 75.
Whoa, holy cow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And much smaller. And another thing with the common snappers, when she's gravid and just full of eggs, that turtle looks like 10 pounds of meat stuffed in a 5 pound sack and or shell. And the alligator snapper never quite gets like that extreme, bloated up with eggs,
Hmm.
but are considerably bigger. Turtles considerably bigger.
Hmm.
And alligator snapper matures at a shell length of 14 to 15 inches, somewhere around 28 pounds, 26, 28 pounds on the average. And as they get bigger, and you won't find any females much bigger than 60 pounds. Oh,
Hmm.
yeah, there's been a few in the 70s and stuff, and those animals will go up into the upper 30s and lower 40s. I think like last year, the biggest nest we dug was I think we did a 46 or a 48. There were several of them.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, so just
there's a lot of 20s and 22s.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting to think about. So, just a couple more questions here for thanks again for all your time. Do you have any idea how big your biggest male is?
No, I could guess maybe 130 to 150 pounds. You don't know.
Oh,
You see their heads out there, and of course, some individuals have just a little bigger heads than others. So, but uh, you can't just on demand yank a turtle out of that pond. It's
right.
You set a trap out there, you'll get 6 or 8 in there, and it's just a nightmare. You can't even get the trap out of the water. It's so heavy and
Yeah.
just a hornet's nest. But at this point, Parker, we are just content watching these animals,
Hmm.
um, observing them. It's such a beautiful thing to watch them. Basically, they believe they're in their natural environment. They're wild. They are skittish.
Hmm.
At feeding time, they do come up. They stay underwater, but you can see bubbles. They when they hear the tractor coming, it's usually bringing a bucket, a cubic yard of fish. and Tyler's noted when he fires up that tractor, boy, but you don't see them. They're down
Yeah.
on the bottom, and the water's cloudy. But that's about as tame as it's probably ever going to get, and uh, and I'm really surprised we've gotten that far. There's no hand feeding or anything like that in that pond. They just
Yeah.
wouldn't have anything to do. They're just super reclusive animals, and I want them to stay that way.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason they live so long and they get so big because they're smart and they're skittish and they keep to themselves and they're calm.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, the common snappers are so bold, and I actually raised them for several years, and those things would actually come out of the feeding time, and they'll eat pellets, they'll eat fish, they don't even care what you put in there, but they'll come out of the water and come up to your feet at
Yeah.
feeding time, and so there's just a chasm of difference between uh, Calidra, the common snapper, and Macroclimes, the alligator snapper, and that they both have long tails and they both snap, but there's huge differences in their just the way they go about their business and their the alligator snapping turtle will literally run. I mean, will retreat from you.
Mhm.
Will nothing to do in the wild. Will scurry away. And common snappers, they don't really want much to do with people, but they're much bolder. They'll come up and clean off a string or a fish that you've caught hanging from the dock or the boat. Alligator snapper, unless it was completely left alone and there wasn't any, they wouldn't be anywhere near where people are. They
Yeah.
can the vibes, they can feel it,
Yeah.
and don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, are you still? I saw that Greg Whitsock he got a big mail from you. Are you
Uh,
still are you still like donating, selling to like Bass Pro kind of places?
not really. I mean, I've kind of quit taking adults out of my my breeder pond. There's I mean, I've just noticed they're doing so good. They
Mm,
seem so content and everything just going right. I don't have the heart to yank them out of there
yeah.
anymore. Put them in anything artificial. I
Hmm.
just don't. I mean, I used to do it, and Greg's was actually the last, excuse me, the last turtle um, that I took out of there, and that's been a couple years,
Hmm.
and and he hounded me pretty good for it too.
Yeah, he's another one of those guys who's just grown up his whole life wanting a alligator snapping turtle.
Yeah, and he can write the check, so
That's great. How about poaching? Is poaching still a significant thing? I know I see people in China. I follow them on Instagram, and it seems like they're poaching from the states. Uh,
Um,
is that
I
still a concern?
no, I don't think so. I know that it happens on a minor scale. I don't think you can get away with much these days
Okay.
without getting caught and without people being found out. It'd be really difficult to get anything out of the country without taking a major risk
Okay.
uh, because of the CITES status they have. That there's people that catch them in states that it's outlawed, that there's no possession limit, and they're eating them. But this turtle did not get endangered and threatened from people taking them home to eat them. Is that something I want to see? No.
Right.
But it's the commercial end of it. It's where the money gets involved. It's where you get teams of commercial trappers and
Yeah.
refrigerated trucks and places where you take these animals to butcher and distribute. That's how they get endangered. It isn't, you know, a poor family in the panhandle of Florida that is looking for dinner for a couple of nights.
Right.
And that's my feeling. No, I don't like to see these animals butchered, and I would never do that. But to be fair, that isn't what got them in the situation they're in. It was the commercial industry that did it.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah.
Get money,
So
but it's quite a different thing to take something and out of the wild and take it home and feed your family versus setting up a commercial enterprise and selling them, and and you would not get away with that for very long at
yeah.
all. There was a couple of years ago a bust that was happened down in Louisiana. They were running them over to Texas, and uh, feds got involved, and I think those boys are in prison.
Wow. Yeah, I love to see that kind of progress that we've made in protecting these guys, and that, like you said, it's encouraging to know that this couldn't happen. You couldn't do a commercial operation very long without getting caught and getting in
Uh,
trouble for it.
Not in the days of the internet and forums, and it might go on for a short span, but it wouldn't last long. It just
Yeah.
would.
Well, okay, so that brings me to the last question here. So, John, what happens after you? Is there any plans to expand? Is there any does your son is will he take over? You know, what happens next?
Well, he knows everything I know about the care of the adults, when to feed them, how to feed them, the fish hookups, the carp derbies. He knows how to dig eggs better than I do. He can find nests better than I can.
Mm.
Uh, I am happy to report that I'm in, to my knowledge, in relatively good health. It's
Yeah, wasn't.
6 years old, but yeah, it's there's something that because you could never get all the animals out of
Right,
that.
right.
I mean, couldn't. It would be a fool's errand. They're going to dig up in the mud. They're going to get up underneath the banks, and actually kind of pack in there like sardines when if somebody was to drain the pond.
Mhm.
Uh, it's something we're going to have to work on, Park.
Yeah.
Have to work on. But Sky's 27 years old and in good health, so
Mm.
they, uh, if I would happen to suddenly pass, they would have a good caretaker. The
Okay.
problem we're running into is that we're seeing is that turtles of nests that we missed like 20 years ago and more are now starting to become mature and are um, adding to the collective of eggs laid every year. Last year, we had been digging 5,600 eggs since about 2006 or 7.
Yeah.
Well, for 5,600. Well, the year before last, we had a crazy spike that I just blew us away. All of a sudden, we're digging like 6,300 and some change.
Whoa.
Well, you could explain away maybe 150 eggs as well. We just found more. Or
Yeah.
had a great feeding year or something. Well, no, you can't explain that away with 800 plus eggs. So it really we've come to the conclusion because the time is right. We've had 20. I mean, when we first set that up, and I was putting alligator snappers in that pond on this property here in the spring of 1996,
Hmm.
uh, and we were not the well. Skylar was 3. He's 20 now, so uh, you know we were not the astute nest finders that we are today.
Hmm.
So imagine how many nests that we missed of turtles that went back into the pond, and the small percentage of them that survived to adulthood. But you know, uh, 2019 was the first year that we saw this spike in eggs that couldn't really be explained by, oh, those females were holding back all those years.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no, I ain't buying that.
Yeah.
I ain't buying that. That we what we've had is we've had basically, I guess, would you consider that an F1 generation blending into the pre-existing population, and
Yeah.
just kind of another mind bender thing, Parker, that uh, I always thought that the egg production in that pond would just, over the decades, dwindle down and
Right.
just ebb out over who knows how long, maybe 60, 80, who knows, 100 years. Now it doesn't look like that's the case at all. We've got more coming up into the ranks of adult breeders than we are dying. I haven't had an adult die that I've seen out there in 3 years or more.
Wow.
And you see a turtle of that size, you see it die.
Yeah.
They float up. But so, in all likelihood, we're going to have to probably move some of those animals into another pond that I have on the property that's already fenced. It's a great pond. It's a great environment, maybe even better than the one that they're in. But,
Okay.
we just have to, see what develops and, make a decision down the road.
Yeah. And so you're saying so a female alligator snapper, she'll only lay once a season, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because some like diamondback terrapins I think lay 3 or 4 times a season. They're crazy, super
Finding
prolific.
lay 2 or 3 times a season. Even my, some of the little stuff like razorback musk and some of the they'll lay 2 or 3 eggs 2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting about the snap, and that's actually crazy to think about for you. You've been at it so long that you got this F1 generation, all adults. They're breeding now.
Never would have thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been awesome, man. Thanks so much for all your time. Thanks for all you do. Seriously, this has been one of my favorite interviews because I've been wanting to do it so long, and I appreciate so much all the work that you put into helping save these turtles.
That's the whole thing, Parker. You know, it isn't really work; it's play,
Right.
and that's a good life hack. Nobody can tell if I'm working or playing.
It's great.
When you play, you got a pretty good gig going.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, awesome, man. Thanks again for your time. I thank God for the Loggerhead Acres Turtle Farm, and we could talk about this more. Maybe someday we will, but for now, that's going to have to do it. And as
And during
oh
the spring, we do something, and during nesting season, and people could see the eggs and how we did.
yeah, yeah, John, you cut out there at the end. I missed the first part of that. You were saying before you talked about the nests.
Maybe in the springtime we can do the same thing. You can see how we put the eggs
Yeah.
up and all that.
Yes, that would
Uh,
be fantastic. People would love that. That would be like a lifelong dream of mine. That'd be fantastic. So,
we
yeah.
get Skylar involved in that too.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. Well, awesome, man. I'll let you go here. Thanks again. Appreciate all your work.
All right, my pleasure, Parker. Talk.